Now, to break down the merits of that argument is Dan Geltrude. He's a CPA and financial analyst who says a $15 minimum wage might not be the right policy at the right time. So, Dan, when we look at exactly what the Biden administration is looking to do to really get this economy back off the ground following this pandemic, one of the key focuses, as you know, is a $15 minimum wage. Why do you think that's not the right policy given the time?
Because it is basically a tax increase. When you're talking about going to businesses and saying, from now on, you must pay your workers this much money, $15 an hour. Well, that's an additional cost that businesses weren't anticipating. So ultimately, it doesn't really achieve the intended outcome, which is, I understand what the president is saying. We need to make sure people can live above the poverty line. But this is not the way to do it, because when you increase wages and costs for businesses, what do they need to do? They need to increase the price of their products. They create inflation. And who suffers most from inflation? It's the lowest wage earners.
And, you know, I get that argument, too, because I understand it. If you, for example, are bringing up the price to what you have to pay a worker to $15, it doesn't necessarily just stop there, because then what happens to the people who are making $15 before that? One would assume that you have to increase their pay as well. Otherwise, they're doing more work or have more qualifications for someone that is now getting paid the exact same. So when we look at how this has been applied to either individual companies, individual states, Joe Biden will reference Florida, do we see that there is a shift from maybe human workers to maybe technology, automation, things of that nature?
There's no question that it is. And that switch really serves businesses well. Why? Because in the short term, there are tax benefits for an investment into artificial intelligence and technology. So they get the short-term benefit there. Then on top of that, in the long term, being able to reduce, let's say, wages or the cost of employees in general, they're also benefiting from that. So you are definitely going to see a movement towards implementing and using more technology in businesses. And let me say this, Bill Gates sees this coming, and he made a statement saying, for companies that ultimately are replacing workers with robots, there should be a new tax on the robots to be able to make up for the lost income and payroll taxes by reducing employees.
And it does seem to be an inevitable trend. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where Andrew Yang, for example, was saying on the Democratic primary trail that there should be money given out. I believe it was $2,000 per month for people based on this very idea that companies are inevitably going to move to automation if this is the route we go down. And, you know, you said something at the beginning of this interview that I thought was very spot on. I'm willing to even have this argument because it does look at someone at the bottom tier, someone who maybe is trying to make ends meet. If this was, for example, talking about giving tax breaks to billionaires, I wouldn't even entertain this segment, but it is an idea that looks out for the average worker. It's just a matter of, is this the best policy for the average worker? Over the past couple of years, though, I've been told that we have seen minimum wage go up organically in many states. Is that true?
Yeah, well, yes, it has. But look at why it went up. It's because there was competition for workers by businesses. Because the economy was strong, now the market was lifting wages. And if you're going to try to do this, at least wait until you have a strong economy and it's more easily absorbed by business, as opposed to doing it right now when we are really struggling to get back to good.
And that's an important point, because there are still millions of Americans who had jobs 1 year ago that haven't gone back to those jobs. And I understand, too, that you want to make sure that the average worker is living above the poverty line. I think that's a goal for all Americans to make sure it's taking place. But I think that to some degree, you do have to weigh the sacrifices, because are you going to, for example, lift up the wages of some people and not give other people jobs, allow them not to go back to work? Is that really the trade-off that we're seeing when it comes to this topic more broadly?
But the answer here is what you just said. This is about job creation, not making it more expensive for companies to be able to operate. So, for example, if someone has a job stocking shelves and they're being paid $7.50, all of a sudden that job is now worth $15 an hour. It's not. So the parallel to this is let's say you own a house and you want to sell it and you say, well, I want to sell it for $1 million, but the market is only willing to pay $250,000. Well, that's all you're going to get. The same thing is true for workers who are providing a service for their employers. The employers are only going to pay so much for that service that you provide. So the market always adjusts for all of this.
And I think that's an important debate to be had right now, too, because as you said, we're coming out of a pandemic. Right now, the economy isn't as strong as it was 1 year ago, let alone maybe 2 years ago when, for example, tariffs were something that many people, even if they were free market type of oriented people, were saying, you know what, this is a time to do it. The U.S. economy is thriving while the global economy may be a little bit more stagnant. That's no longer the case. The United States is now at a point where it's trying to rebuild the economy in a way that once again gets people back to work, but also gets their wages up as well. So how should our elected officials be approaching the economy right now? Is it a matter of lowering taxes, lowering regulations, things of that nature, so that people and businesses can flourish?
The first step right off the bat is we have to start opening up the economy. We're seeing the rollout of the vaccines. That's a great sign. But it's more than that. We really have to figure out how to allow businesses to open. We are doing so much damage in various states around the country by making businesses keep their doors shut. That's the first thing that's got to change. And then we have to say, we have to relieve them a little bit of their costs, not by increasing the minimum wage, but going the other way and actually lowering taxes for a period of time until they're able to get going. And then, of course, the enemy of all business is regulation. So try to pull back on that. But it really looks like the Biden administration is going to go in the exact opposite direction. So we're going to see how this plays out.
And, you know, the point about opening up small businesses is so important because even when we have the conversation about, for example, getting those stimulus checks out to Americans who are really in need of help right now, I had a little bit of an issue with that because that money seemed to just be going to Walmart, Amazon, the essential businesses that were allowed to be open at the time, whereas a lot of small businesses were closed. And we've seen revenue shoot up at Amazon, for example, Walmart, for example. Is it maybe more on those companies who are seeing those type of revenue increases to increase the minimum wages themselves rather than having the government come in and tell them that's what they should be doing?
Well, if you look at Amazon, Amazon was able to go to $15 an hour. And why is that? Is because Amazon has been growing by so much. Their market allows for them to go to $15 an hour. But then to force the small business owner to have to compete with an Amazon or a Walmart, which is difficult already, and then saying, oh, by the way, we're also going to raise your costs. Now, look, if a worker wants to get $15 an hour, where do they want to go? Amazon or the small business? They're going to go to Amazon because that's who's paying more. That's what the free market does. So the small business owner has to figure out how to compete with that. For the government to step in and say, no, you must pay that amount. You pay the same amount as Amazon pays. Does that seem fair? We're killing small businesses with this.
Yeah, and we've had small business owners on the show to say that very same thing, that $15 would mean that they have to let another employee go or maybe take someone on part-time so they don't need to give them benefits. I understand that what it does to getting that money into one individual's paycheck, but there's other factors to take into account that sometimes I don't think gets brought into this conversation, which is why I'm glad we had you on today, because it's a little bit more nuanced than people want to give it credit for. Dan Geltrude, thanks for coming on and explaining this topic.
Thank you.
And still ahead, the mainstream media